You're listening to an event from the U.S. Institute of Peace, part of the USIP podcast network. For more information about our work around the world, visit usip.org and check us out on social media.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gordon Peake. I'm the Senior Advisor on the Pacific Islands at the United States Institute of Peace. As an institute, we work on preventing, mitigating, and resolving violent conflict. And we do that work through our research, through our advocacy, and through having events like this today, where we get to profile the work of extraordinary people that are working in everyday, grassroots level for peace in Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is a country that the United States is paying much more attention to over the last couple of years. It signed a defense cooperation agreement with Papua New Guinea. It is one of the countries and regions that's designated as a focus area under the strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. And I'm very, very grateful that you're here joining us in the room and online this morning, or in the late evening if you're in Papua New Guinea or in the Antipodes. People who've been at USIP events before normally we have a standard format where we have a talk and then we have questions. We're going to mix it up a little bit today, and we're going to show a short documentary movie that profiles some of these extraordinary peace builders. And one of the extraordinary peace builders we have is in the room with us today. His name is James Komengi. He is from Hela province in Papua New Guinea. Hela is one of the two provinces that the United States is focusing on as part of this strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. And James runs an NGO called Common Good. And James, I think, is someone who's taken the path less traveled. He started work as an industrial chemist, working in the oil fields, and he gave it up. He gave that life up in order to work as a peace builder. And we're going to be profiling James in this video, along with some of our other USIP staff in Papua New Guinea, including our senior advisor, Ruth Kissam. So just as a kind of run of show for you in the room and you online, we're going to show the movie. It's a 15-minute movie. It was made by two extraordinary Papua New Guinean filmmakers, Godfrey and Clyde. James and I are going to have a 20-minute conversation about the movie, about some of the work that James has been doing. James is here as one of our John Lewis Fellows, named for the congressman from Georgia, who was a big, big supporter of the United States Institute of Peace, and he's been here for 2 months on this fellowship. We're going to speak for about 20 minutes. We're then going to have a sort of hybrid conversation with some of our colleagues who are in the virtual room in Port Moresby and in Melbourne, and we're going to talk a little bit as well. And I think these events work best whenever we have full and engaged participation in the room, virtually and physically. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I'm really looking forward to sort of celebrating the work that you've done, James. You've been working on a special report with us, along with a colleague, Michael Main, from the University of Melbourne. And I want to just also celebrate the work of our documentary makers. Anyone who's worked in media, anyone who's worked on trying to put documentaries or podcasts together know that there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. So this is a really nice way of celebrating their work as well. So without further ado, I'm going to stop. We're going to watch the movie for 15 minutes, and then James and I are going to have a conversation, and we'll open it up. Thank you once again for being here, whether you're here physically or online.
In the heart of Papua New Guinea's Hela province, a land once known for its natural beauty and resources, bears witness to the devastating toll of tribal conflicts. For over 2 decades now, this region has been marred by violence, displacing countless families, especially women and children, who find themselves trapped in the crosshairs of warring factions. In 2013, the NGO Médecins Sans Frontières, or MSF, released a first-hand account from one of its staff members stationed in Tari, revealing a harrowing reality. Violence in all forms, including sexual violence, has become normalized for the population here. In fact, in 2016, MSF reported that 94% of patients reporting to its family support centers in Tari as well as Port Moresby were female, with some of the highest levels of family and sexual violence anywhere in the world outside of a conflict zone, and to this day shows no sign of resolution. But it's not for lack of trying. Despite the sheer scale of this issue, there are efficacious personalities who refuse to see Hela in this state. People who are doing everything in their power to bring peace back to the place that they call home. During the 2023 PNG update hosted by the University of Papua New Guinea, this issue was given a platform to not only show the effects of this violence, but to examine the causes behind it.
All forms of violence, including SARV and GBV, undermine the conventional cultural and human rights of people.
Present at this forum was Michael Main, an anthropologist from the Australian National University who wrote his doctoral thesis on the Hela province.
In that part of PNG, traditionally people lived not in villages but scattered homesteads, gardens with protective defensive walls around them. Sexual violence, in particular domestic violence, doesn't generally happen in the open, it happens in the private sphere. And it's shameful. Traditionally, Huli women can divorce husbands because of mistreatment, and that can be the start of wars. This sort of thing isn't going to be occurring in the open. So it's very difficult to collect data. It's very difficult to collect data in a war zone, essentially. It's another issue.
We got to speak with Michael, as well as James Komengi, one of the efficacious personalities who is working at the grassroots level to make peace a reality for his home.
Let's just put the Hela province to perspective. Let me just go back and explain to you, help you understand how complicated it is to try to deliver things in Hela.
James is the son of a Huli pastor in Tari and worked as an industrial chemist with Chevron Oil before committing himself to peacebuilding work in Hela, and is currently engaged in a project that would see safe houses built within the war zones themselves.
So much of the violence that's happening in Hela is being promoted by people who are already involved in violence, in tribal issues. They're confined to the pockets, comfort zones, and they are deprived of freedom. They have access to guns, so they're going back in their own backyards, kidnapping, threatening vulnerable people. But the women and children continue to be vulnerable because there's a wide range of disruptions and disasters that have happened. The elections also bring in disruptions. 2015 to 16 was the El Nino. In 2017, we had the elections. And then in 2018, we had the earthquake. In 2020, COVID-19. In 2021, we had the ASF, African swine fever, that took away pigs from families. In 2022, the elections that happened, some violence happened. 2023, now we have El Nino just, kicking in. You're looking at families that are vulnerable and that have been exploited, mostly by men who are armed. Communities are living in fear, and because of the violence that's happening in all over the place, that's sporadic, that sort of comes and goes and confuses people. Vulnerable people are being exposed and pushed around, and then they are being exposed to sexual violence, and that sort of crime, yeah.
And another more recent development, criminal gangs who are acting in the area. Some of you would have heard reports of some of the terrible things that have happened. This criminal activity means that our airstrips are shut down. Even if we could get food, we can't bring it. It means that people run away, they're not gardening, they're not bringing food to sell. It means that staff, it's very hard for them to stay in these remote areas when there's nothing for them to eat either.
And where are the victims ending up? Here in Port Moresby. They are here. If there's someone saying, put them all in the Papua New Guinea flight and send them back to Tari, what happens when you fill a bucket that's full of water? It overflows. Send them back to Tari, they'll overflow and come back here in Port Moresby. Don't waste your time.
And that's the biggest problem here. The people who can help the most, the people who can contribute the most to efforts of peace and development, are the ones leaving, out of necessity, out of fear for their own lives, and heading for the nation's capital, Port Moresby, in hopes of a better life, but still longing to return home if and when the violence comes to an end. In Port Moresby, however, there are few places to go that offer refuge, and even fewer for women. But here's where we meet yet another one of these efficacious personalities, Ruth Kissam. As chair of the board of the Advancing PNG Women Leaders Network, or APNG, as well as being the senior advisor to USIP, Ruth not only offers refuge for women fleeing Hela, but stands as an intermediary between those who make peace attempts where government intervention fails, or in most cases, is non-existent. Her main concern is to empower, educate, and resource the individuals on the ground to make change for the better. The individuals who, if forced to leave Hela, halt any possible development in the region.
So of course now the 22 women that are based in Hela, we work with them on building their capacity, on actually running their programs. We also work with the women in Hela province on running any of their programs that they run, building their capacity, managing their funds, applying for grants on their behalf. And so basically what we try to do is become more like the intermediary for the organizations that we have that are working in the provinces, and Hela is about 22 of them. Hela is, yes, the province is named Hela, but Hela is actually a group of people. It's actually one of the largest tribes in Papua New Guinea. It extends to Enga, it extends to Southern Islands, where Hela province is now, where the Woolly people are. Parts of Gulf province and parts of Western province are all Hela people. They are people that are deeply loyal. Like they've got a set of rules that they live by, and they don't kill people anywhere else. It's only at the battlefield. They don't engage in killing women and children. They don't kill people within a house. When people are inside a house, they don't burn the house down. They don't kill two men from the same family in one fight. But since the introduction of guns, there's been a gradual sort of eating away of what used to be this very powerful culture that used to respect their women, that used to honor the elder, used to place a very great value on the future. Their children are very important. And now you have a society that it's going into anarchy. Anyone can do anything they feel like doing, and there's no accountability from elders. There's no accountability from leaders. Before, it used to be, village elders and tribal leaders that will say that you've stepped out of line. And now it's young men with guns that are telling village leaders to sit down.
We got the chance to speak to a few of the women that Ruth has helped, who each shared their stories of the violence that they experienced that forced them to leave their homes.
My name is Miriam Kai. I work as a nurse, community nurse, since 1987.
My name is Janet Buddha. I'm from Hela province. I am a teacher by profession.
My name is Teresa Tandago. I got educated in the village and I became a nurse. I'm a registered nurse.
I left Hela since January due to the fight. A man came at night to rape me in the house, break my window, so I couldn't stay there. So I ran out. I called for help from army. They never came to help me. Although me plan no plan the man. Na morning big fight come up, killing plan the line, low health center where Mr. Blongen. And I become I have no one to stay with me. All my children, I fly them in Mosby, and I'm here doing nothing. I'm one of the victims too.
There was an incident that happened, that there was a fight, and then they killed my brother. In revenge, they killed another man who is the owner of the school which I was teaching. I couldn't come back, so I moved into Port Moresby.
I woke up one morning, someone within the family shot another family member, and they threw him right in front of my house under my vehicle. And they were blaming me, so I took my twins and my daughter, just got into my vehicle, and we just went out with nothing.
People start to like blood, Keke don't like blood, Ran don't like blood, so they all over. Also mindset blood clear now. There is no law not in place in Hela.
The data is out there. The level of violence against women is on another level altogether. And for the first time, we've got women leaders that are telling us that we don't want to go back. Because if we go back to the province, it's like we're stepping back into hell. These are the women that are the change makers in the community. I can go and work in their community. They're the ones that can. So how can I work with them so that they can get over the trauma? But a lot of them are telling us that, no, we can't get over the trauma.
I was almost living in exile for 6 months. So the police stations in Mount Hagen, or in Goroka, or in Lei, or in Chimbu were my house. So I can remember myself put in box, cotton box outside the store, of a supermarket and, bag.
According to Ruth, one of the challenges is that Papua New Guinea's journey to being a constitutional democracy created a winner-take-all system in which traditional Melanesian values that prioritized shared decision-making have been diluted.
We are a society that is not used to electing people. We follow the bloodlines. If your father is a good orator, then you are an orator. If your father is a warrior, then you become a warrior. That changed when we started electing people, which is totally not part of our culture. We don't elect people. It's not a one person. We don't have this one person is able to rule over the others. We don't have that. I think the moment we started becoming that society, we lost a huge part of who we were. The way that I'm seeing it is political intervention is never going to fix this problem. That's going to exacerbate it further. What's really going to fix this problem is getting down to the roots where the leaders are, the real leaders of the community are. Some of them are just normal village court officials or normal people, but when they speak, others are able to sit and listen. And that's who we need to empower. If we want to take back our communities, that's who we need to empower. And those are the ones that, even with my organization, those are the people that we work with. We do not go into a community to impose what we think are the solutions for the community. We tell them what is working. What's working, how can we empower you? So if we're applying for a grant, then we try to meet the grants, the funders' requirements. But we allow the person on the ground to do what they are doing without sort of like any restriction on them, because we need them to be as creative as possible. They are the ones that have the problem. They are the ones with the solution. We make sure that they have the necessary resources they can be able to have to find solution to the problems they have in their communities.
Through APNG, Ruth has not only been able to assist these women with their own movements, but has also given them the tools and the education necessary for them to help the people on the ground that they know when they eventually return home.
I decided to establish or fund an organization called Angora Women and Youth Development Foundation. I've established it in 2009. Most of the women and youth in my area were uneducated. They were not exposed to outside world, so I decided to set up this foundation to assist them.
They have given us leadership trainings. Leadership training that I will go back and train my women or women for on the ground, like leadership, mindset changes, business, bookkeeping, and this type of things will be learning me.
However, there are some that aren't as fortunate as these women. For some, leaving just isn't an option. For these citizens, James Komengi is backing a project that would put safe houses within the war zones themselves, not just to protect people, but to educate those both in and around them.
I think the first most important step was for me to market the idea to the people and convince them to trust me. Without that, they've been disconnected. They've lost trust in leadership. The councillors were full-time living there, and they've been trying to speak to the government, and they couldn't connect with the government. We then sort of became the voice for them, and now the next step is to market this information out. I will take this information out overseas, Port Moresby, government level.
This is our training center and our library. 2 safe houses, number 3 and 4, and 5 and 6. 2 for men, 2 for women. And number 9 is our house for disabled kids.
Well, there are grassroots efforts, of course, to combat violence. There's the Young Ambassadors for Peace program that had run for the last 12 years or so. All of these, of course, drastically under-resourced. They absolutely know what they're doing and they do good work where they can. But of course, it's a large province with a large population, and it is an overwhelming problem. Organisations like the UNDP have been running programs, agriculture for peace programs and things like that. And there's only a certain amount that can be done. And of course, outside organisations are structured in a way that they have a sort of a project mindset. Okay, we'll tender for this project and it'll, last this amount of time, and it has all these sort of limitations around it where, this peacemaking, it's really a process rather than a project. It has to be led and directed by the grassroots people like James Komengi who know what they're doing basically and can stomach the risks.
However, despite everything that Ruth, APNG, James Komengi, and these women have done, it's painful to see that there's still so much left to do to make Hela Province a home that they and others like them can return to. And the key really lies in its people. The leaders on the ground who are making change. Small change, yes, but effective change. The sort of change that can lead to larger and longer lasting effects, if they are given the resources required to get there.
So it's come to a stage where it's not even a stalemate. It's not even, they're not even on par. It's like the warlords are winning on every front. We need public servants like teachers, nurses, health managers to go back home, run those clinics, work in those schools, open up new schools. People in community, tribal leaders need to take hold of their own tribes. We can't let hooligans and warlords take over our tribes and our communities. Even Hela as it is, it still is a tribal land. Every land that is there belongs to a tribe. We need those leaders in those tribes to take a hold of their own tribes. It's got to be a change of how we are viewing leadership. If it's not working from the Prime Minister down, then it's got to be working from the community leaders up, from the tribal leaders up. But there's got to be leadership shown at some level that takes back our communities.
All right, well, thank you everyone for watching that. I've watched so many drafts of this, and I've actually never watched the final version of it, and I think we can agree by sort of looking at it, just what a powerful testament it is to the work that you're doing, James, the work that our senior advisor, Ruth Kissam, is doing. Ruth is in a kind of waiting room for us. We're going to speak to her in a bit, and it shows, I think, that really this term that a colleague of ours, Melissa Damien, first used, this efficacious personalities, the idea that people are really important in a highly relational society is really important. So I'm really grateful that for everyone who watched, and I think we've all taken a lot from it. I'm going to put on our colleagues are going to put on the screen. We're going to have a little bit of a 20-minute conversation, and then we're going to bring in our colleagues who are waiting for us. Our colleagues are going to put on the screen a picture of James, and our colleague Aaliyah is here in the room, and of the other John Lewis fellows that traveled down on a journey through the kind of civil rights tour. They started in Atlanta, they went down to Montgomery, Alabama, and they ended up in the picture that you'll see, which is over the Edmund R. Pettus Bridge into Selma, Alabama, the journey that John Lewis made in the 1960s. I've been on that journey myself. I think probably one of the most moving days I've spent in the United States was in Montgomery, Alabama, where we had Rosa Parks, and there's I think it's called the National, I wrote it down because I can never remember, the National Museum of Peace and Justice, but informally known as the Lynching Museum, which is constructed almost like you feel like you're walking into a sarcophagus, into a tomb. And it's a reminder to me that the story of the United States is a complicated one. And it's a story that is still being written. It's an unfinished story, just like Hela's story. So James, thank you for being here. Thank you for enriching us over the last 6 weeks of your fellowship. I'd invite you to speak a little bit about the week's journey that you spent down on the civil rights tour and what you took from it and the journeys that you went on as well, because a lot of it was very resonant with Hela, you were telling me.
Thank you for the opportunity to expose the issues of Hela. I represent people like the three ladies we saw in the video, but also people who are not connected to services and development in Hela, who are in the remote regions. I would like to be their voice. Going into Alabama, into Montgomery, was an experience that connected me to things back in Hela. Going into the museum in Montgomery kind of shocked me a bit. The extreme violence and the manner in which all the different violence that happened was extracted and displayed. So we could learn from within the civil rights movement, there were different levels of violence that had happened. And I reflected on tribal violence in Hela. We just call it tribal fights, like our forefathers did. But within the tribal fights, today, as we have modernized, it's no longer tribal fights up there in Hela. There's rape happening. There's kidnapping happening. Tortures happening. There's arson, willful destruction of properties. All of these that are unlawful that's happening. But because we continue to call it tribal fights, it misleads our government out there to think that it's just tribal fights. And I was able to realize this as I was going through the displays in the museum. I've also come to realize that the situation is similar to us in Hela. There's trauma. In Hela, much of the violence you see is driven by people living in post-traumatic stress. Generations have lived through it. We also have the young generation disconnected from our beautiful culture. And down there I've seen also that the civil rights movement that had happened was to win, was for the rights of people to have votes. I see that the young people were also disconnected to this past. I've also seen our children in Hela are being influenced by all the violence culture that they are being misled, and even teenagers are involved in the violence. There's an effort that's happening down there in Selma, where children are being taken out from the schools and they're taken through to the museum to connect with the history and be guided up. In Hela, we've tried that as well, introducing futsal, a mini version of soccer, where we have involved boys and girls together to play. Each time they kick the soccer ball, they would say, kick violence out. And it became so popular it spread. But again, tribal violence picked up and destroyed our program. So this is an observation. We needed to work with small children, the next generation, to cut off the violence.
Thank you, James. I want to talk a little bit about, and I mean, I'm just reflecting as you're talking about, I mean, your own children do not live in Hela anymore. They live outside of Hela. They are part of Hela's exodus. And I've had the great opportunity to meet your wife and some of your daughters in Port Moresby, just amazing people, but people who've had to leave their homes because of this. And you've stayed. And I want to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing on sorcery accusation-related violence. And I'll mention just before we do that we published a report at United States Institute of Peace with my colleagues Kathleen Keenast and Negar Ashtri Abai and Melissa Damien that talked about some of this sort of everyday violence. Papua New Guinea is the second most dangerous place in the world to be a woman. And you are doing work that is trying to provide safe houses, provide sanctuary to some of women who are accused of being sorcerers or accused of being witches. And you were telling me whenever we were sort of putting this presentation together that a lot of the work, and you sort of flag it a little bit in the documentary, is about educating people that accusations that are made about you're a sorcerer, you're a witch, are actually not founded, but they're based on sort of a lack of knowledge of the world around us. I'd invite you to speak a little bit about that.
I had to move my family out because Hela was becoming unsafe for women and girls. I believe every day there's fear in the minds of women and girls. Kidnap and rape has been happening a lot. In the safe houses, we decided to build it in the hotspot community because the efforts that were put in were based in the towns. But people in the remote communities were believing in sorcery, in the witches, social aggression-related violence was isolated, and there were people killing other people who were being accused. And so we decided to take the risk, and we moved into these spaces, in the remote communities, and we built a safe house. We are now keeping survivors there, but we've had attempts to murder survivors we are protecting. Just one last week, a lady living together with others in the house, someone was trying to breach the door and go in and kill a woman there, accused for a death that happened in Tari. The son tried to do that. The security at the safe house apprehended him and warned him not to come back. So they chased the people away, men away. And this happened at night. On Friday, I got a picture of a woman whose hand was chopped off, sitting, clothes stripped off, surrounded by community. She was accused of as a witch for 2 men who died in the week. And the lady managed to escape, but they went and found him in the village. They tied wire around her neck and pulled her, and she died. And this is last week. Last night I got these updates. I've seen these pictures. Social aggression-related violence was never there in the dialogues. It's always been tribal fights. So the work we are doing is try to blow the lid off the social aggression-related violence, and its effects is comparable to damages that are being done by tribal fights. And we are building a chain of safe houses because we are seeing attacks on the first one we are building. So we want to move people around in the different communities when they are being threatened. But it's all sustained also on agriculture, because we found it difficult to access funds to sustain this program. Although we've done it alone, without funding, we are already delivering the results. We are saving lives. But to sustain it, we are promoting agriculture, introducing quality seeds, training a nomadic tribe how to do agriculture. So this is like initial steps in agriculture, trying to cultivate, improve soil, improve farm management skills, and then introduce quality crops and help them to manage and realize the yield potential, and then try to sustain them on agriculture. So it's picking up.
And of course, I mean, with cell phones and mobile phones, we're all connected to this sort of all the time, and it's sort of a point that our colleagues Miranda Forsyth and Joe Barak and Anurag Chakma have made in a research project we're doing, is how sort of reinforcedly traumatizing is seeing these pictures all the time. Another issue, James, is that you've talked about, and I've seen some of the pictures that you've sent, is about sort of climate change, which almost is like being inside a place where the gas oven is turned on, but you can't smell the gas smell, which is an everyday occurrence in Hela, and that accelerates conflict. It exacerbates conflict. And we saw just even a few weeks ago in the nearby province of Enga, the tragic landslide and earth that happened there, with people being buried under the ground. I'd invite you to speak a little bit about sort of how climate change is exacerbating, accelerating, and conflict in Hela. Perhaps we don't sort of think about it because it's not something that's visible to us.
I'm a trained climate-smart agriculture promoter, trained by the National Agricultural Research Institute. I don't seem to find people taking this on and practicing it in their families, because the tribal violence that happens keeps on displacing them. And so they are forever moving, forever avoiding the bullets, living in fear. The climate change discussions, we are not responsive to it. When a natural disaster like earthquake happens, the landslide or flooding happens, then we are really, the disaster we have already experienced, as well as this builds up, it's like triple the effect on the lives of people.
one of the themes that's in the documentary, James, and it's something I think it's always on the table, but we never really know how to resolve it, is I think Michael put it really well, that most development aid and most support is a project, whereas peacemaking is a process. And you almost get the sense of kind of two different conversations that are happening at the same time, where there's a kind of grassroots community level saying, well, give us the support and we can do it, support to these individuals, this term efficacious personalities. And then on the other side, you have a set of international aid donors, multilateral organizations that are there to help, that want to help, that are keen to help, but have their own structures and systems and processes as well. And you almost get the sense of sort of two different conversations happening at one side. And invite you to speak a little bit about sort of some of the challenges. And instead of sort of saying, well, here's the problems, what would be a way to kind of address this? What would be your advice for people who are like in this room, who are watching online, who are going to watch the recording of this webcast, to, how can they assist the work, the kind of extraordinary work that's going on at the grassroots level that we've seen just a kind of soupçon of today?
In the sorcery accusation-related violence and the peace-building programs that we've done and the seed banks that we promote, we struggle to deliver those. We find it difficult to access support. And the donor funds, we cannot access them. The requirements to access those funds are far beyond our capacity. In terms of program or project delivery and achieving results, we are doing those. We have a lot of success stories down there. What we need is a partnership that connects to us so that our success stories are magnified. They are sustained. And so without that opportunity to connect to resources, I've gone into developing sustainable models. I'm using the potential of crops, agricultural crops. And that's an example I've done in the Sustainable Safe House program that I just talked about. We're using crops like rice to save lives. When tribal violence happens, women and children run away. They run out of sweet potato supplies. They have to go back to the garden, which has become a battlefield. They are ambushed. They are murdered. So we tell them, grow rice, take your rice back, never come back. We're increasing, delivering improved sweet potato vines so that sweet potato can be in huge yields. It can be available in so many places so that wherever they run away, there's enough supplies there. Right now, they're using poor traditional seed varieties. So it's in the use of potential in agriculture crops. We are trying to sustain our programs. Accessing support and funding is difficult for us. You heard the stories of 3 women here. They are involved. There are many more out there who are doing initiatives, working on issues. The resources that are accessed by NGOs, they only come as far as the sealed roads, the guest house or the hotels, the police stations, where the government is established. We are working in remote areas where they cannot access us, and the funds don't come down into our hands to promote all these programs.
And there's also a challenge, that is, you've sort of like accessing the funds, because we all work within bureaucracies, and bureaucracies run on paper, and rightly and appropriately, bureaucracies impose standards and expectations on this. And the challenge is just is sort of riding up to that quality. There's an Australian woman I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Her name is Anna Gibert, Gibert, and she's written a lot about this, and she's proposed what I think is a really great idea of a kind of secretariat function. So people that can actually not do the work for you, James, because there's no way that anyone could ever do that work, but can actually do the kind of necessary paperwork that is required in order to be able to kind of fulfill, rightly and appropriately those standards. And I think that's a theme that comes out across in the special report that you are writing with our colleague Michael Main, who in many ways provides that service for you of a kind of secretariat function as well. And it's something I think that as we kind of look at that documentary and kind of reflect on it and kind of grapple with how to help in a place like Hela or Morobe, that idea of a secretariat function I think is really important. I'm going to ask our colleagues who are in the back of the room, who are sort of helping keep the show on the road here, to kind of open up. You're going to see Ruth Kissam, who you met in the documentary, Michael Main, who you met in the documentary, and a gentleman called Clyde Kyla, that was one of the two documentary makers that helped us make the documentary. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation with them, and then we're going to kind of open it out to the room and to those watching online. There's Clyde. And I think we're going to go for that. Hello, Clyde. How are you? Can you hear us? Never work in live TV. Clyde, can you hear us?
Yes,
okay.
I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Okay, great. We can hear you. We can hear you perfectly fine. So nice to see you. You were one of the two people that were there behind the scenes making the documentary. I met Clyde about a year ago when I was making a documentary myself, and he's such an extraordinary talent, along with his other colleague Godfrey Kaptigau, who was the voice that you heard on the documentary. And we really kind of put Clyde and Godfrey through the ringer on this. It was a very small budget for the documentary. It was about $3,000, I think, to make that and splice all the material together, but also to have to work with this very sensitive material that you were working with, Clyde. And I'd love to sort of talk to you about the sort of challenges and how you went about doing some of the interviews for the documentary. I mean, obviously speaking to James and Michael, but you also had to interview some of these sort of women that have heartbreaking stories. And it's a challenge to do that. And I invite you to speak a little bit about that to us, about how you went about doing that.
So, with speaking to the interviews, mainly the ladies, it was important to follow the process of connecting with them on a personal level, being company as well, and allowing them space to have a conversational flow while actively listening to them as well, to help conduct the interview. Yeah. And as to how we went about doing that, we came up with a production outline before the whole endeavor started, and we outlined a production plan where we identified the interviewees and conversational points to explore the impact of tribal conflicts on the community, focusing on the experiences of public servants who fled, internally displaced people, and we decided that it would be best for the documentary to examine efforts to mitigate conflict and rebuild the community to end on a high note. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Clyde. And I just want to kind of use this opportunity to kind of recognize you. I know Godfrey can't make it for the work that you've done in helping make this documentary. Thank you. Clyde's one of our behind the scenes people at USIP. If you follow our social media, you'll see pictures of a monthly public policy talk that we do in Port Moresby called Rampire Talks, where we kind of gather together people that are kind of wrestling and working and thinking about these issues, and Clyde helps provide all the behind the scenes support. So thank you, Clyde. And I'm going to turn now to Ruth Kissam, our senior advisor, who was also probably, I think, the co-star of the movie as well. Ruth, nice to see you. James and Michael, who we'll speak to in a minute, are writing this special report. And the sort of thrust of the special report is to kind of make a point that there is to present portraits of peace-building practice in Hela. Things that are, because the initial tendency would be to kind of paint everything in dark terms, but actually to show that there's these points of light that are in Hela. And they profile you in your work in it, but they profile it in a kind of an unusual way. They take it as a sort of a sideways look at it, because they look at the work of ExxonMobil in helping, to use the kind of seed metaphor, to helping kind of seed you as a young leader. So we're speaking to you in Washington, D.C. Of course, you've been here in your capacity as United States Institute of Peace Senior Advisor, but I think you would have come first because you were being sponsored by ExxonMobil along with I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but a large cohort of women leaders. And those seeds that were planted 15 years ago are sprouting in various different ways, and obviously sprouting with you. So I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about the program, because I think it's kind of one of the many unheralded examples of things that are going on. And sometimes, because we all have short attention spans, we kind of forget about these things. But I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about that and your reflections on your work and the work that you talk about in the documentary. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Gordon. Firstly, for the opportunity to be able to talk about the work that we're doing here. But then at the same time, like you, I think this was the first time I saw the documentary sort of in full. So that was really good. Nicely done, Clyde and Godfrey. Actually, I'll backtrack a little bit to what you said earlier about a secretariat, because that connects rightly to the work that we are doing. See, back in 2006, when ExxonMobil first started operation around in 2004, one of the first things they did, and I believe they did the right thing, was pick out women leaders in the community and then send them off to a program that was run back then by Plan USA called Global Women in Management. And this was a 2-week program in Washington. So in 2006, they got 2 women from Hela, I think one from Central Province because of the pipeline. So they only chose their footprint. So it was from Hela Province to Southern Islands, Gulf, and then Central Province. So where their pipeline was, I think it was about 5 years later, they started opening up to a country as a whole. I was part of it in 2016, but by then they'd already gotten women from all over the country to be able to come. But every year it was either 2 or 1. So far, we've got 71. The last person to attend was last year when I was at USIP. We had one woman over who was the director for the P&G Women in Coffee. So she's got about 800 farmers that are part of her secretariat. So the word you mentioned about secretariat, being an intermediary to work with people that are effecting change on the ground, is very important, because in order for us to be able to get resources over to the people or the efficacious personality, sometimes community-based organizations are a one-person organization. So in order for us to be able to help that one person, you have to meet the requirements that are set. Some of these requirements that are set by donor partners are very, very stringent. Some of them, you've got to have a PhD to be able to actually go through and fill out the log frames, which is really, really hard. So in order for us to do that, you have to have, like I said, an intermediary. So that's what the Advancing P&G Women Leaders Network is. It's a secretariat that is made up of 70 plus network of women leaders that have been sent through this training by ExxonMobil. Now, I don't know what Exxon thought in the first place when they did this, but so far it's paid off, because most of these organizations are now the frontliners when it comes to peace building. A lot of them are now they're the ones that are working in community empowerment, in community peace building. They're running hospitals. They're running schools. Where the state ends, this is where they come in. They fill in the gap where the state could operate from. They also become the bridge where they connect the people to the state. They're the ones that house the church, or they are housed within the church, which becomes an integral part of the community. So these action by ExxonMobil paid off, and has paid off for us too as well. So I've been the president of this organization as a volunteer for the last 2 years, going 3 years now. And I've seen how these leaders, especially community leaders, and you've seen three of them talk. One of them is a teacher, and she was a deputy headmistress, and the other one runs a a hospital that has a catchment area of nearly 13,000. That she had to close down because of the fear of sexual violence. And that's another thing, which is totally not part of our culture. I'm a Hela woman too. I'm from the Enga province. We don't touch women and children. We don't rape women and women at all. But now we're seeing that happening in our culture, which is being pushed even more by the use of gun and by the use of electing people into place where now power becomes a very important thing for people. So in order for them to keep onto power, they're creating chaos amongst tribal leaders. So yeah, going back to what you said earlier, ExxonMobil did this without realizing that it's now becoming something that is a very powerful tool. What we're using now to empower communities through the women leaders that are already placed in those communities.
Great, thank you, Ruth. I mean, I think it also gets to the idea there's so many more unheralded stories that we do, because sometimes our time frame for looking at success is too limited. So I'm thinking of the United States presently, when the kind of wise decision made in its strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, to have a 10-year time horizon for the work that it is doing in Hela province and Morobe. Sometimes our time frames are too abbreviated. I spent a lot of time in Bougainville, and there the fruits of a program that I was at the launch event of in 2016 are slowly coming to fruit, which is that the cocoa plants that were planted in 2016 are now kind of taking off, and now Bougainville's income has gone up because the price of cocoa has gone up. And I think you mentioned coffee earlier on, and I think that's something I want to maybe draw back to James, is about a lot of the work that you're doing, James, is really innately practical. It's not theoretical, it's not conceptual, but it involves actually giving seeds to people to help them plant it and give them the kind of the dignity and economic empowerment that comes with agriculture. You and myself and our colleague, a fellow John Lewis, fellow Aliyah Adam, traveled to rural Pennsylvania a couple of weeks ago, and we had one of the most extraordinary days that I think I've spent and we've spent, meeting with Amish farmers, meeting with rural Pennsylvanians that were doing exactly what Ruth's talking about, and what you're working on is agriculture for economic development. I'd love you to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing on, I think it's called seed banks, and invite you to speak about a little bit about that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to sort of open it up to people in the room and to people watching online, and we're also going to get our colleague Michael Main, that is patiently in late night in Melbourne, is waiting for us as well. So James, I'd love to tell us more about the agriculture work that you're doing.
So we realized that in all the disasters that's happening, the need for food is common. And in Hela, we had poor seed qualities. And so people were suffering more without seed quality seeds. We also didn't have diversity. So in terms of disaster preparedness, we couldn't with only depending on sweet potatoes. So immediately after the El Nino of 2015-2016, the Food Agriculture Organization of UN then thought they needed to develop this, so a partnership was set up, and including the National Agricultural Research Institute, or NARI. And in that arrangement,
they started to train us, and then we continue to push quality seeds into the communities. We created seed banks, and these were placed in the safer spots, which is the churches, around community leaders, which were mostly women, in their backyards. We also have councillor women, and under farmers who were skilled and reliable enough. From 2021 to 2019 to 2021, we have created over 65 seed banks. And this is mostly managed by women. And from the seed banks, we trialed new crops like wheat, rice, maize, cassava, new varieties, sweet potato, new varieties, brought in from the National Agricultural Research Institute systems and trialed. So the performance was assessed, new farming methods were trained, shown to the families, participants, and they would then take this out, and seeds from the seed banks would be distributed to the communities. It was important because after tribal fights, families were struggling to recover. So the quality seeds would be early maturing, had increased yield, tolerant to droughts, and they had economic value. And so when women were promoting this, and the Hela men want their women to be behind their backyard. Some of the violence that happens is just women and children going to the market and they tell them, go back to the house, and they just bash them up. So we reached the women and children in their backyards. In that space, men respect their women. Giving the seats gave a platform for women to rise up as leaders in their own backyards. It also gave them the opportunity to influence their husbands in their own backyards where they respected them. It brought in income and promotes early recovery from if they have been displaced. So today we have mothers who are working in groups. They're harvesting huge areas of sweet potato in bags and selling to a piggery project that's been set up by business communities. And they're earning money, and they're sending their pictures smiling. We are earning money. We have rice grown by some families, but it also needs some input to set up machines. We have tried food processing to try to store cassava, maize, and try to process. We have demonstrated people are interested. Yes, we need to push that on. We need resources. In the Safe House programs we are doing, we are basically, because we have that agriculture program supporting us, we are able to deliver a successful program in a remote region that's disconnected. And we have survivors living together just depending on the crops they grow. So yeah, we promote it because we see the potential. We try to use the potential of each specific crop to address specific issues. And it's working.
And I think this trip to Pennsylvania we made, James, that just showed the kind of, your NGO is called community good, the common good that comes with agriculture and the common good that comes in all our lives with work. And because work brings us dignity and work brings us respect. We've got a lot of people in the room. We've got a lot of people watching online. I'm going to sort of pause here and invite sort of colleagues here who've been patiently sort of listening and digesting what's been said, our colleagues online. If there's any questions, what we'll do is we'll take some questions, and then we've got a couple of other things I'm going to ask James, then we'll wrap up in about 25 minutes or so. And if you could please obviously press the button and introduce yourself and ask the question. Thank you.
Sure, great. Hi, my name is Andrew Harding with the Heritage Foundation's Asian Studies Center here in Washington. Thank you all for hosting this event and for this great video. It was great to watch. As Gordon, you mentioned, it's not just theoretical, but to see reality and practical things. It's very useful. one of the comments that really stood out to me in the video was talking about, say, the differences between Melanesian power structures versus, say, democracy or federal governance. And it was interesting to where it seems as though there are differences between how that may operate and how that can create some tensions. And so I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about the differences between what the traditional political power structures are like in these regions, and then what tensions that then brings at a national level, and how that could contribute some differences in governance at a national level. Thanks.
In the traditional Hela culture, our governance was based and promoted from the houseman, the man house. And in that system, conversations about what to do, where to go, what not to do, guiding of the young men, all of this happened every day in the houseman. So there was control over tribal fights. They would know when to stop. They would know what clans to attack. They would know what not to do. Today, in modernization, our conversations from the houseman were taken to the pulpits in the church, rugby fields, grandstands by politicians, marketplaces, bars. It's become a community conversation. The control is lost. The messages don't sink in. And when we are talking about cases like the tribal fight, we assume that we are still connected to our culture, we're living the culture. It's already changed. Hela has gone into this breakdown since 1992 when a tribal violence happened within the Southern Highlands. Then we became a province. That was like more than 30 years. Today, the current active and productive generation are people living with post-traumatic stress. They have seen bloodshed and grown up with it in a region where government service didn't exist. So the violence is being promoted by those who are frustrated and traumatized. Yeah. And it's a minority who are building networks going around and terrorizing and destroying those who have progressed, the lives of those who have progressed. So it's the governance system. We need to realize what we are missing is dialogues. What we are missing is what basically our uneducated fathers had in our traditional system, which we don't have today.
There's the U.S. political scientist Francis Fukuyama who visited Papua New Guinea in the sort of 2006, 2007, and he writes about this in the beginning of his book on political institutions. And he writes about how Papua New Guinea has this most rich culture that James has just talked about the houseman and about that, but how it's been kind of broken down by modernity. And he has this terrific line that always sticks in my mind, which he said, the journey from Port Moresby to Brisbane is 3 hours by plane. But in many ways, you're traversing 2,000 years of political development in terms of how the institutions that we kind of take for granted work. And I think one of the themes that's in the report that, James, that you've written along with Michael is sometimes we look at institutions, they have familiar names like the police or the courts, and we assume that they sometimes work in the way that we think that they should here. But it's something I think really worth bearing in mind, that sometimes there's a veneer maybe that there's not. My colleague Megan is here. Do you have any questions online? Okay, so would invite any more questions that are in the room on this, or else I'm going to throw it to Michael, who's in Melbourne. This is always the worst worrying thing when you do these facilitated things. Anyone's going to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Emma Wilson from the Australian Embassy, Washington. Really good to see you both again. We're really delighted to have you at the Australian Embassy a few weeks ago, sharing some of this, and it was great to hear a little bit more about it today. I thought that was really fascinating, the seed banks and your work to connect kind of gender equality, women's economic empowerment and peace. I'm just wondering, you've talked about how it has kind of provided a platform for women leaders in the community. I'm wondering if you're seeing kind of any of the opposite effects of that. So as you economically empower women, it kind of increases gender-based violence, kind of jealousy around kind of women's economic empowerment. Is that kind of an unintended consequence, or are you seeing the opposite? Thanks.
A good question, thank you. We have seen a lot of attacks on the seed bank and initiatives led by women, attacked by men who are involved in tribal fights. Basically, it's happening because women are rising up their leadership. They are influencing their brothers and husbands to drop weapons, come and join them because they are earning money, and the men realize that this is good for their family. So they're stepping in, joining the women and children, working in the gardens. Their former enemies are seeing they are now changing, and they would then come and attack and destroy. So we've had a couple of our seed banks being targeted because of this situation.
Good morning. Thank you, James, for the presentation. Thank you, USIP, for the event and the video. My name is Jim Delajackma. I'm an international development consultant. I just wanted to try and ask you, James, to sort of build on some of the comments about the impact of quote-unquote modernity. And in the last 20 or 30 years, or since 1992, when Hela became a province, what are the impact of development, which can obviously have pluses, such as mines, the opening up of roads, electrification, or any of other things that come with that? Do they sometimes have unintended consequences?
In 2008, the Hela Transition Authority was set up for Hela to become a province. Around the same time, we had the Young Ambassadors for Peace promote reconciliation of 16 major tribal fights, mostly in the Taripori district, which is the headquarters of Hela province. Permanent peace, permanently resolved. Today, they live freely like they were never enemies. We delivered that, and then Hela provincial government was able to move in, transition, and from the Hela Transition Authority into the Hela provincial government today. The focus on peace building in the province has not been good. It hasn't taken on responsibility. We've also promoted, when ExxonMobil came into work, developed the PNG LNG project in 2011. That was like 2.5 years or 3 years after we worked with volunteers to deliver peace in the communities, and they benefited. Today, we have ExxonMobil, a resource developer well placed in Hela, who has not recognized the effort of local actors. They are hiring soldiers and police to protect their assets. Around the project areas, there are people bending down and killing each other. So we also have the Barrick gold mine in the past, and today they have renewed their agreements. Their discharge from the Pogara mine tailings comes down through the Strickland River, where we are building this sustainable safe house for survivors of social reaction-related violence. This is a region that doesn't have quality education. Only up to grade 5 they have had. Girls are forced to marry early child marriages. Mothers are delivering disconnected in the bushes. They can't come across because they don't have bridges. And so they deliver wherever they are. And after birth difficulties and mothers are dying, and many little children are growing up with their father starting day one. Social reacquisition related violence is big in this region. Malaria kills many people, and so many issues down there. Barrick has polluted the river, and people are going into this region, and they are mining the dust, and they're getting skin disease and all that. The big organizations placed in the Hela province, including the government, local governments, and the districts, they need to step up.
Michael's been patiently waiting here, and we have a question that's going to come. It's going to come. So, Michael, I'm going to give you a sort of 2-minute warning that we've got on this. Actually, you know what? I'm going to actually ask you to talk a little bit about it, and then we're going to ask my colleague Megan to ask some of the questions that have come in from the floor. Michael, James just referenced something called the Young Ambassadors for Peace program. That is, I know about because you've mentioned it in the report that you and James are co-writing, which is about these kind of unheralded portraits of peacebuilding success in Hela. And I think one of the really interesting things about this Young Ambassadors for Peace program is that it is a program that has its origins in the Philippines. It is a project that has its origins in a kind of church-based, in the United Church as well. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about the section in the report where you write about the Young Ambassadors for Peace program, because again, a little bit like how Ruth has described it and how we've characterized it, this was a seed that was planted that has kind of sort of bloomed off in different ways, but perhaps we don't realize that the seed was originally planted by a Filipina nun. Is that right? I can't remember.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it was I think this person sort of built up her own sort of peace building experiences from the Philippines, and came up with some really ingenious ideas about how to bring conflicting parties together. And the model and the idea took off in Hela, in Tari, James's brother Moses and James and others took it and used these ideas in a profoundly transformational way, ways that sort of went really against the grain, self-consciously standing against the grain of what would sort of be culturally appropriate. So having people who are sworn enemies actually face each other in a room, sort of a profoundly difficult and risky thing to undertake. And James can speak to the actual process much better than I can. But and another, we're talking about the Sorcery Safe House up in the northern part of Hela. That also involves local people there turning around and saying, we have to confront what's happening within, and thinking very creatively and how to do things differently within their own culture. And you can't really have an external organisation come in and say, well, you have to do this, that, and that differently. What is happening is every single one of us, has the own. We all have arguments within our own cultures. There's always tension, and it's the same everywhere. And so this sort of capacity that comes from within is just an incredibly inspiring thing to see. And I think what I've sort of, amongst all the doom and gloom, Papua New Guinea is kind of famously known as endowed with incredible natural resources and natural capital, but its human capital is exceeds its natural capital as far as, and the great tragedy of Papua New Guinea is its human capital is so vastly untapped, but it's there in such abundance, and sometimes it just takes literally a seed sometimes.
That's a nice way. I think that's a nice way to end it. I mean, I think you're right. The human capital of Papua New Guinea is extraordinary, and the ability to kind of work in these difficult circumstances. And one thing we really want to do in the report, and we've been sort of pushing Michael and James in the report, and we pushed Godfrey and Clyde in the documentary, was to show that it is not, as you say, Michael, it's not all doom and gloom by any means. There's some extraordinary individuals doing extraordinary things that are the real unsung heroes of the country. So we have a question or questions from online, and I'm going to invite my colleague Megan to do it.
Yeah, so we have one question that's asking about women leaders who are volunteering to take on most of this work and the challenges they face as women doing this work, how they've been able to address it, and I would extend that to how they can be supported through those unique challenges they're facing as they're doing a lot of this important work.
I might get Ruth maybe to sort of weigh in on that, and then I'll ask James. Ruth, are you still online?
Yes, I am.
Maybe the question about kind of women leaders and how they go about doing their work could be, you're perfectly placed to answer that.
I can speak from my experience. So I've been one of the few people at the front line of social accusation-related violence for the last a decade and a half. We've pushed for the repealing of the Sorcery Act back in 2013, pushed for the amendment to the Criminal Code, Section 299A, so that we made it an indictable offense. Just passing of the Glassman Act. My oldest daughter is actually someone that she's from the area that James is now trying to build the safe house, because that's the one area in Hela, the whole of Hela region that has cultural roots in sorcery accusation-related violence. The people call them the Pisai, whereas in other parts of Hela, we don't have cultural roots in the belief of sorcery. In other provinces, the Lower Highlands province, you do have. So I've been involved in that space, but always on a voluntary basis. And to be honest, it's really hard for women leaders, individual women leaders. Had it not been for USIP actually asking me to come on board as a senior advisor, it would be doubly hard, because I've now just taken on some few more roles to sit on board the Enga Provincial Health Authority, which I just had to fly in from to be able to attend this, because there is an issue on the ground right now at the landslide area where the bodies are buried under, and the company Barrick wants to actually take its truck over the burial site without taking into consideration cultural context, where you cannot do anything over a burial site without respectfully moving bodies. So we have a situation on a security issue on the ground. So women leaders working in areas in Papua New Guinea, especially on peace building, is a very, very big challenge if that women leader is actually an individual community-based organization, which is a common sight in a lot of communities around Papua New Guinea. And a lot of them are not registered with the IPA, or in the US, you would say 501c3. They're not. These are women leaders that will respond to needs in their communities and rise up in that area. And like Gordon mentioned earlier about how these women leaders are supported by their either their sons or their husbands or their brothers. And when you see that, it's now sort of changing the narrative, because men are now starting to see the kind of convening power a woman has in bringing community leaders together. We have a a cultural saying where a woman puts a bilum or a bag, string bag down and sits down, that's where the community forms. So whenever there is an internally displacement that happens, either through tribal fighting or natural disaster, where a woman puts her foot down and sets up, say, place for the night, that place now becomes the community, because she would look for the place where she can easily be able to have access to water, access to food, those kind of things. So we're seeing that happening. And Gordon, just before I sort of cut off, let me just put it this way. Clyde and I work on a monthly program called the Rampire Talk. The last 4 months, we've been talking about women, peace, and security, because while we wanted to talk about other topics, that always seemed to come up in every other topic that we would bring on inside our Rampire Talk. And sadly, Papua New Guinea doesn't have a national action plan on the UN Security Charter on women, peace, and security. And for the last 24 years, we didn't have one. But through this Rampire Talk, where USIP sponsors at the National Research Institute, this topic is now sort of garnered the support of the government. And now that we're looking towards having a national action plan for Papua New Guinea. But that dialogue is starting to happen because women from Hela, from Enga, from other parts of the country who are leading this are saying that we need a coordinating point. And when we realize that it can happen through the Women, Peace and Security National Action Plan, the trigger was the USIP's Rampire Talk. So again, it goes back to how all of these are sort of interlinked, that even in small ways, we can help. And it's not all doom and gloom. We've got men that are standing behind their women, either the wives or the brothers or the mothers, to say that, look, we can do this. We can stand with you. If you have the convening power, we can stand with you and we can do this. So yeah, there's a lot of shining lights for examples in Papua New Guinea that we can actually take on board and work with.
That's right. And I think like interlinked and unsung as well. I mean, sometimes when we plant seeds, we don't stick around long enough to see what blooms out of it. And I think this example that you've given, Ruth, of kind of this monthly seminar series that yourself and Clyde run, you can see details about it on our USIP social media channels. We're hoping to start webcasting them maybe in the future. You know, are the seeds for these conversations that bloom in different ways. I'm conscious of the time, and I want to ask James a little bit about his experience as a John Lewis Fellow, which will round us off. But I'd invite any questions from anyone else that's online or in the room.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Catherine Yusko. My name is Catherine Yusko. I'm from the Atlantic Council's Indo-Pacific Security Initiative. Thank you so much for sharing these powerful stories and the important work that you're doing. You mentioned earlier that because there's so much internal displacement, it's difficult to put mechanisms in place to respond to climate disasters. So climate disasters act as a threat multiplier. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on how that looks in practice and how that tends to manifest in communities.
The tribal violence that happens in Hela, and it's most of the activities we are talking about are being by the NGOs that come in, actually doing it around the Hula tribe dominated regions which are accessible to services. They're placed there and promoting it. The Huli tribe are known for most of the tribal violence that happens. There are 4 other tribal groups that are quiet, but they are further out at the edges of the province. Much of the services that we talk about, the programs, don't tend to reach them. This is where groups like myself tend to move in but disconnected. So, and the larger Huli tribe then tend to destabilize. And so, because many of the programs are being started among the Huli tribes, the failure rate is higher because they are more prone to violence. And so when that happens, then people will have to prepare for disaster preparedness, and the impact of climate change will be realized by people who are set up on the land, Right now, we have families who are running away from bullets, from threats, who are living in fear, you know. And so for us to talk about the effect of climate change, which is slow onset, it's like they don't tend to think much about it. They fear the bullet that can destroy their life right now. Yeah, the disaster that's happening. So that's sort of the focus every day. Yeah.
James, you've been on a real journey throughout your whole extraordinary kind of career and life, but you've also been on a real journey with us over the last 7 weeks as a John Lewis Fellow. And most of the most important journeys we've gone on are within our own minds and our own experience. I'd love you to talk a little bit about, what you've learned as a John Lewis Fellow, and what being here in Washington has kind of made you appreciate about the world that you are sort of adjacent to and trying to work with.
Firstly, before I came on this fellowship, I was in a remote region in Wankipa where we are building the Sustainable Safe House. So this was a great opportunity for me to expose a violence that was buried. We are talking about SAV. And I'm very grateful for that I'm able to expose the issues that are not being exposed and people are really dying. Secondly, for me to realize that the efforts we are doing in our remote regions in the countries, among the fellows, we are part of a greater movement. I've always thought that I'm disconnected from resources, that I'm doing this alone when I was back in Hela. But coming in here, I realized that we are part of a greater movement. Yeah. And it has given us the opportunity to learn from each other, to realize where we can improve our programs. Also a great opportunity for me to learn from visiting the Amish community. But I work in a community currently where they are disconnected totally from government services, poor people living in all kinds of issues. Here, the Amish community are living in Washington, D.C., the big city of America, the capital. They choose to live a traditional life. So I was beginning to understand. I wanted to visit the community to try to compare how are vulnerable people down there not getting services, and then we are having issues down there, neglected by the government. And here, a community in the city wants to live a traditional life and don't want to advance with modernization. So I've learned a few things, and so it's been a learning experience for me.
Oh, it's been a terrific experience, and the report that I've alluded to is going to be coming out over the next few weeks that James and Michael are preparing. I'd like to thank everyone in the room that's participated in this conversation, that's listened in, and everyone watching online. I know it's late over in Papua New Guinea and over in the Antipodes, and really appreciate our colleagues doing the late shift for us. And without further ado, I want to thank you, and I'm going to close the meeting 30 seconds before we're meant to start, so that's pretty good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this event. If you'd like to listen to more events or explore our other podcasts, visit usip.org/podcasts.